Alrighty, I apologise for that. Take two here of the Golden State with Mates post-game live after another Warrior victory. Not the greatest, not the best, I won't lie. Fairly, I'm not going to say a negative game, but certainly could have been better. The Warriors basically played, I would say, 8 or 9 minutes of incredible basketball in the first half, and then was basically reliant on a Steph Curry rescue job down the stretch. So we saw Draymond Green's return. We saw Chris Paul come off the bench for the first time. Plenty to take away from this one. So leave your comments below if you would like to get your thoughts in. I'll read them out as we go along here. But a 106-95 win, I think probably not too much to be taken from this one moving forward. It's a little bit of a rough night, I suppose, with having Draymond back into the lineup with CP3 coming off the bench. Certainly some positives, there's no doubt about that. But this was, a talented young Rockets team who clearly wanted to put their best foot forward against the Warriors. And they were, for a slight moment there in the fourth quarter, they were on top and looking like they would come away with an upset win. So a good result in the end, I suppose, to get the win and for it to be somewhat comfortable over the final 2 minutes. So going through the game kind of chronologically, we obviously had, the Rockets get off to a pretty good start, 13-7. I thought Draymond's first stint, obviously back in the starting lineup, was pretty rough. Not unsurprising, like he's missed the whole of preseason and training camp, so I think it's perfectly understandable. But the Warriors couldn't really get too much going offensively in the first 7 minutes. And then the bench unit came in and, wow, what a difference. So basically, Steve had the full second unit out there for quite a period with CP, obviously, GP2, Moses, Jonathan Kuminga, and Dario Saric. And with Steph Curry off the floor in less than 9 minutes, the Warriors go plus 16 with that second unit. Absolutely unbelievable. Chris Paul running the show offensively, but I think it was actually more so the defense leading to the offense. The Rockets could not get anything to go on. I think that was down to some really harassing Warrior defense led by GP2. Kuminga and Moody were also a part of that. We saw Kuminga get a steal and transition layup as well. So that second unit was absolutely fantastic. And at that point, the starters come back on. You're up 16 basically. And it looks like the Warriors are totally in control. And unfortunately, from that position, the starters, which is quite amazing to say, given what we've seen from the Warriors in the past, last season in particular, where all the opposition runs usually come when the bench is on the floor. Starters come back in, and the margin goes from 16, and the Rockets get it back to 4 late in the half. The Warriors do through Klay Thompson, who had a good night. We'll get into some of the more individual elements in a little bit. But he had a positive night and led kind of an 8-2 run to close the first half. Allowed the Warriors to get to a 57-47 lead at the main break. Third quarter was a back and forth affair. The Warriors, again, couldn't get much going offensively, just 24 points in the third quarter. Rockets, after going down to 13 again in that third quarter, were able to get it back to 6 by the end of that period. The Jonathan Kuminga experience continues to be a bit of a yo-yo up and down, and it was all encapsulated in the final 3 seconds practically of that third quarter. So first of all, JK in transition, really smart pump fake, draws a 3-point shooting foul on Jayshawn Tate to go to the line with 3 seconds left, makes the final 2 of those. And then, of course, we had immediately after him with bad would be putting it pleasantly, a dumb, horrific foul, basically 50 feet from the basket, sends, I think it was Tate again, to the free throw line for 2 free throws to end the third period. That was a bit of a momentum killer for the Warriors, or a bit of a momentum booster for the Rockets, who then started the fourth quarter on a 6-0 run. They were really coming, and as I said before, there was a clear intent from them. This was their home opener for the season, wanted to send their fans away with a win, and at a point there, with less than 6 minutes to go, they led by 2, Steph Curry. Steph Curry happened. So the amazing thing with Steph is he was poor in this game, and if you look at the final box score, it's actually not a great Steph Curry game. But the fantastic thing with him, and it's pretty rare to be honest, across the league for players to be able to have the shooting and therefore the scoring capacity to turn a bad night into a good night and into a which is a good night, Steph. Get it? Uh, it's amazing for him to be able to do that in basically a 2-minute period and all of a sudden turn what is a tricky situation where the Rockets are leading by a couple of points into a comfortable-ish win in the end where the Warriors actually win by double digits. It's absolutely amazing. It was a different performance, obviously, on Friday against the Kings where he was really dominant throughout and he obviously had that 16-point third quarter where he really, extended the Warriors' lead and they were able to kind of hang on for the rest of the game there. This was one that was really in the balance where Houston may have been a slight favourite at a point there. And obviously, the biggest sequence, I think, so everyone will point to the Dylan Brooks, or not the Dylan Brooks, but the Steph 3 over Dylan Brooks, where he goes into a nasty crossover, lets Brooks fly by on the contest, and then hits the 3. That play will be replayed countless times on TV and social media, wherever else. That was absolutely extraordinary. But the biggest sequence for me was the Warriors really under pressure, down 1, I think, at the time, maybe down 2. No, down 1, I think they were. Draymond makes a layup over Şengün, who then absolutely fouls the crap out of him. Dre goes to the line, Warriors up 1, misses, but Loon battles for the offensive rebound, and it ends up being off Tate out of bounds to the Warriors, and then Steph hits the 3 off the inbound. So that's a 5-point possession, basically, that takes the Warriors from down 1 to up 4. That was the play right there that turned this game. I have no doubt about that. And then Steph you wouldn't call it the finishing touches because the last 3 threes he made after that, he made 4 in a row. And the last 3 of those were crucially important. There's no doubt about that. But looking back at this game, that possession where Dre makes the layup, misses the free throw, Loon battles for the offensive board, and Steph hits the 3 off the inbounds pass. That play, that sequence was no doubt, I think, the biggest sequence in this game. So Steph leads the way in the end with 24 points. I think he had 7 rebounds and 6 assists. Pretty good all-around game. But up until, he had 10 points in the first 42 minutes. This was not a good Steph Curry game. I thought Brooks did a pretty good job on him up until that point. So if you look at Steph, I'm just going to double check what he ended up shooting from the floor. He was 2 of 8 at one stage, I think. And then, obviously just gets off the chain late, and that's the difference in the game. But he finishes 6 of 16, 6 of 14 from 3. So, 42.9% from deep. Did not make a field goal, obviously, from within the arc. So 37.5% shooting. That's the kind of game it was. This was a fairly defensive game, which is somewhat of a surprise, somewhat not of a surprise, because the Warriors' defense in the opening 2 games has actually been pretty good. And then the Rockets' offense going into this game, I know it's a small sample size, but they ranked 29th in offensive rating going into this game. The addition of Fred VanVleet hasn't necessarily worked out for them as much as they would like. Their defense has actually been okay. You bring Brooks in, you've got a pretty good point of attack defender there who's going to be really pesky. Şengün is not a great interior defender, but Jabari Smith Jr. next to him has got some length. I would have considerable issues with that defensive front court going forward, but they've actually been okay defensively. It's been offensively where they've kind of struggled. We know VanVleet, we know he's small, but he's actually battles really hard on the defensive end. There are a few times there in the third quarter and in the fourth quarter where Kuminga or Wiggins was trying to post up on VanVleet, and VanVleet wasn't going anywhere. And Kuminga and Wiggins weren't able to take advantage of those so-called mismatches, which weren't really. Like, VanVleet is a pretty strong defender. So the Rockets, this was a dangerous game, and I don't want to be too negative on it because at the end of the day, the Warriors could have easily lost this game. And if they'd lost this game, it really would have made the Kings win almost null and void kind of thing. Like, if you win that game and the excitement from that game and then you go into Houston and lose, that would be a disaster. And all of a sudden you're in a situation where you're 1-2 again ahead of, the second night of a back-to-back against New Orleans tomorrow. So it's an important win. It's a good win, but the Warriors could certainly play better. As I said at the top, this was 8 or 9 minutes of good basketball in the first half. In fact, really, really good basketball in the first half, almost perfect basketball. And then Steph Curry saving them down the stretch. From an individual standpoint, no player really played. I think Gary Payton II was probably the only player that you would say played well across the whole 4 quarters. So he had 15 points, 4 rebounds, 3 steals. I thought he was a huge factor in what they did in that period with Steph off the floor where they went plus 16. Aside from that, Clay started really well. Clay had 16 in the first half, 6 of 9 shooting. Only took 3 shots in the second half. This is another good Clay game, but it wasn't the kind of, I tweeted out beforehand, Clay averaged over 37 points against the Rockets in 3 regular season games last year. He has 16 in the first half, ends up with 19. It wasn't the kind of 25, 30-point performance that you might have liked as a kind of breakout to start the season for Klay Thompson. But this is 2 games in a row now where he's gone 7 of 12 shooting. Like, it's efficient. He's making good decisions. So it's a good Klay game. It's not a great Klay game by any means. So I think you'd have to be overall impressed by him. But again, it's not a standout performance by any means. Wiggins, more of the same, just not great. 13 points. The defense was okay at times on Jalen Green, but he finishes with 13 points on 4 of 10 shooting, no rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks, and he's a -4 in the game, which was a team worst. And then he ends up in the final 2 minutes getting benched again for the second time in 3 games in favor of Chris Paul, obviously with Draymond back in. The Warriors, or Steve Kerr, went to his most trusted 5, is what I'd call this the trust 5, where you've got CP, Steph, Clay, Draymond, and Loon. Like, that's the trust 5 in Steve Kerr, and I think we're going to see that line up more and more closing games. And I think this Wiggins thing, not closing games, is going to be a consistent theme moving forward if he's not going to elevate his level of play. It's not just the 13 points. Like, that's, not great. You'd like more. We'd like to see a 20-point Wiggs game, but it's the rebounding. 0 rebounds for Andrew Wiggins. And it means that, well, you might as well have another guard out there. Like, Chris Paul is a better rebounder than Andrew Wiggins. He just is. And so when you're talking about the lack of size, well, the lack of size is actually, maybe you're saying that's a defensive thing. Yeah, sure. But Wiggs is not necessarily the perimeter defender he was, going back to the 2022 playoff run. It's not a rebounding thing. You can't say, oh, well, we want Wiggs out there over CP for rebounding purposes. That's false, because Chris Paul is a better rebounder than Andrew Wiggins right now. He just is. So Wiggs is this is disappointing. This is really disappointing. I'm sure he'll get back into the swing of things, but it's really, there's some better aggression, I suppose, over these last 2 games. Again, like 1 of 3 from 3. Got to the free throw line on 5 occasions, a couple of turnovers. As I said, I think the aggression's a little bit better over the last 2 games, getting to the rim a little bit more, not necessarily settling. That's fine, but he misses some bunnies at the rim, like some layups that he should be making. And overall, it's a disappointing start for Andrew Wiggins this season. I suppose the optimistic thing from a Warrior standpoint is, hey, like, if he actually gets going, if he actually starts making his threes, making his shots around the rim, rebounding the ball, how much better could this Warrior team be? So, like, there's some room for improvement there in Andrew Wiggins and obviously for the Warriors as a whole. Draymond, 4 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists in nearly 21 minutes in his return. I thought he got better as the game went on. I thought the first 5 minutes was pretty ugly. He had some ugly turnovers. There was that one in the third or fourth quarter? I think it was the third quarter, where he received the ball and then tried to wrap around behind the back pass to Wiggins, thinking he was in the corner, and Wiggins had cut to the rim looking for a layup or a dunk. And it just looked like an absolutely dumb, silly turnover, because the ball, like, he ended up passing it probably six feet away from where Wiggs actually was. Like, it wasn't even close. So he had some dumb turnovers. There was one in the first half where he was looking for he was dribbling up the floor. He tried to find Steph on the left-hand side of the floor. and threw that out of bounds. So this is classic Dre, right? Like there's going to be some dumb turnovers every game from him. It's just kind of what happens. And I had an article earlier today on Blue Man Hoop regarding, the Dre CP3 fit. It's going to be interesting to me because I do feel more comfortable with Chris Paul having the ball in his hands than Draymond Green. Now, I know that might sound silly because Draymond has made a career outside of what he does defensively, obviously, but he's made a career out of being an elite playmaker for Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Those guys running around screens, Draymond being able to find them or dribble handoffs, whatever it may be. He's made a living out of that and has been so effective at it. But he does have these dumb turnovers from time to time. And Chris Paul, you just don't necessarily get that. Like Chris Paul, you get ball security and a good look on almost every possession down the floor. So I do find it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because there is some overlap in their offensive skill set. Draymond had those 2 layups in the second half. That's fine, but he's not shooting the ball at all. And CP, Chris Paul's been great. Like his first 3 games for Chris Paul couldn't have gone any better than, what we may have expected, really. Like this has been fantastic. But he's not actually shooting the ball any good at all. So he's yet to make a 3. He was 0 of 8, I think, through the first 2 games. He went 0 of 6 in the season opener against the Suns. And then he goes 0 of 3. So Chris Paul's now 0 of 11 on threes this season. Not shooting the ball well whatsoever. He made a couple of mid-range jumpers at important times in the fourth quarter, is what I will say. Just when the Warriors were kind of struggling a little bit offensively, he did make a couple of mid-range jumpers. So that was good. That was important. We cannot forget that. But ultimately, he finished just 3 for 8 from the floor. As I said, 0 of 3 from 3. But again, 1 turnover, 7 assists. What is he up to? 28 and 5 I think on the season. Now he's 21 and 3, or 21 and 4 going into this game, I think. So I think by the calculations, he's now at 28 and 5 assist to turnover ratio. This is why Chris Paul was brought in. And the start to the game, that 8-9 minute period when Curry was on the bench, that was absolute classic why Chris Paul is on this team. Because as I have said for numerous episodes in a row now, I reckon, and plenty of time during the offseason, this is a bench that should be top 5 in the league. It should be. And that first half was, there was time there where you didn't want to break it up. Did you actually want to bring the starters back? That second unit was going that well and was fitting that perfectly together and was in such a rhythm. Did you need to bring the starters back? Kuminga had his 3rd foul, and that kind of, I think, ruined things a little bit. Not ruined things, but took them out of a little bit of a rhythm because that 5 was really gelling. And then all of a sudden you take him out for Wiggins and, the starters come back in eventually and the lead goes from 16 down to 4 very, very quickly. So Chris Paul is doing everything the Warriors want right now. He's just not making shots. And so, again, this is not perfect Warrior basketball by any means. There is room for improvement in everyone on the basis of what we've seen over the first 3 games. A few other individual thoughts here. Loon, I thought, was pretty good on Şengün. He got things, Şengün got some buckets late, but I thought Loon was, that's his 2nd game in a row where he's been able to, bottle up and battle pretty well against the opposition's pretty talented offensive-minded center. Has another 11 rebounds in this one, makes a big dunk down the stretch where Steph was double-teamed and Loon gets the ball rolling down the lane and makes a dunk, so that was important. I do think, the whole fit with him, Chris Paul and Draymond Green is interesting. I thought Dre and Loon, they've played so much together now that I think their fit is okay. We always think, there's a lack of spacing out on the floor when those 2 are out there, and maybe that's the case come playoff time. But in these kind of regular season games, the IQ of those guys, the ability to set screens, the ability to make plays off the roll, particularly Draymond, obviously, is just absolutely elite. And we saw a couple. I think was it Loon had the pass to Draymond for the and one as well in that sequence that I spoke about before. So those guys' passing ability, their collective IQ, their screen setting ability, it means that they can play together pretty effectively. Obviously, as we've seen, they had the best net rating in the league last season for any starting lineup to play over 250 minutes. So this is something that works. The Paul addition is a major test for me, and I still want to see a little bit more of it because Chris and Draymond didn't actually play a whole lot in this one. They obviously closed together, but that was only over the last minute and a half, 2 minutes when the game was kind of in the keeping by that point, given what Steph had done leading up to it. So it's going to be a bit rough for me, but I think Loon was really solid again after a disappointing game one against Nurkic. I think he's bounced back pretty well over these two road games. Let's get into the bench. So we've talked about CP, 8, 5, and 7 for him. Solid game, 27.5 minutes. Interesting to see how much he plays tomorrow against the Pelicans, whether they want to rest him a little bit more. So Kuminga, bad Kuminga game. Let's just put it out there. And I've been super high on him throughout preseason, throughout the first two games. This is a bad Kuminga game. He starts with the one where he gets, I think, a solid rebound or whatever, dribbles the ball up the floor, and then just loses the ball out of bounds for no apparent reason. and this is like the Kuminga stuff, right? Where it's like, how have you allowed that ball? Like, under no pressure, no rocket player within 5 feet of him. And the ball just somehow ends up out of bounds. It's unbelievable. Has some nice, like he makes a three in, I think that was in the first quarter. He has that nice steal and transition layup, which is really good. That's what you want out of him. Apart from that, again, the sequence at the end of the third quarter was that's just classic JK. Like that's summing him up. And unfortunately, there is still throughout games, there is still the good, the bad, and the ugly from Jonathan Kuminga, all in one. And I think as fans, I think we just want to see a strong, consistent performance from him. We want him to kind of, not a breakout game, because I don't think, like, he's probably already broken out to an extent, but it'd be nice to see him can he have a 15, 20-point game with, no turnovers, 5 or 6 rebounds, 1 or 2 fouls kind of thing. Because that's the other thing, like, he limits his game time again in the first half with 3 fouls. Like, yeah, not a good JK game, not a disaster. Like, he still did some good stuff. But again, 3 of 8 shooting, probably settled 1 or 2, like it's 1 of 3 from deep. Maybe I think all 3 of his attempts might have come in the first quarter. I don't think he necessarily needed to be settling for 3 jumpers early in the stint on the floor. Not concerned about him going forward, but I mean that sequence in the third quarter was just a kind of reiteration of, hey, we've got some work to do here still. This is by far a polished product. And ultimately, he's going to make some mistakes, and he's got 79 more games to iron those out. Because if he does those kind of things in the playoffs, Steve's going to be bald by the end of it, because he's going to be pulling his hair out. That was an absolute disaster. You just made a perfect play, drawn the foul on a 3-point shot, which Jonathan Kuminga should never be, drawing contact on a 3-point shot. But it was a beautiful pump fake at the end of the third quarter. Jayshawn Tate, knowing that it was, basically going to be the last shot, tried to contest it. It was fantastic. Got to the line, makes 2 of the 3, that's fine. And then for no reason, tries to go on a steal on the inbounds with 1.7 seconds left. Dear. And it's frustrating, because it's like you're making so many strides here, and then you're letting yourself down with just dumb stuff like that, which is just like, I guess you like the enthusiasm. That's maybe the one positive you take out of it. You like the enthusiasm. And generally, so he plays just under 19 minutes in this one. Generally, I think I like the fact that he's playing through issues or playing through mistakes, and he's not necessarily worn down by them in a way that he was last season, where if he made mistakes, he'd hang his head, and you're not necessarily getting too much more good stuff from him for the rest of the game. And I think Steve would probably see that, and therefore not playing much for the rest of the game. I did think that, this season so far, he's done a good job of kind of parking his wrongdoings and moving forward and making impacts on both ends of the floor going forward. I think that's been a positive, but yeah, just some dumb stuff in this one in regard to that first turnover in the first quarter, and then that foul at the end of the third quarter, because that's the kind of thing that these close games can cost you. And in a competitive Western Conference where you could be at the end of the season, like last season, there could be 1 or 2 games between the third and the eighth seed. Like this is the stuff that you just got to cut out. You just got to cut out. You got to make cut down your margin for error, or make your margin for error greater, because that's not helping in any way. So Saric ends up playing 21 minutes, just over 21 minutes. So he plays more than Kuminga, and it's pretty obvious to me that in an ideal world, Kuminga would play more than Saric. But these are the kind of nights we're going to get where Kuminga makes some mistakes and Steve just thinks he doesn't quite have it tonight. He's not quite locked in totally. He's making some errors, and therefore I'm going to go to the guy I trust in Saric, and I'm going to go to the guy who I know is going to be a perfect fit next to Chris Paul. So he has 4 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists. I thought he did a really good job on the offensive glass. How many did he have? He had 3 offensive boards, just tipping them out, just getting to the right spot and tipping them out. So I think that's a major positive, particularly because with that second unit, you still think that they may be a little bit small because Saric throughout his career has been more of a 4 than a 5. Kuminga is playing at the 4, but some people think he's a 3. I think he's a 4, but some people ultimately think that if his 3-point shooting can get to a consistent point, that he's a 3. Some may say Moody's a 2, not a 3, so he's playing the 3. Like generally, everyone's playing upper position, right, in that lineup aside from Chris Paul. So if Saric can be a strong rebounder, then that goes a long way in being able to effectively utilize that lineup in a way that they did in the first half, where they go basically plus 16. And was absolutely fantastic. That was probably the most impressive stretch of basketball throughout this, like the 3 games. Like that stretch was absolutely extraordinary. We know the third quarters against both Phoenix and Sacramento, they were huge. But for that whole second unit without any starters to do what they did was super impressive. Just unfortunate that the starters kind of ruined it late in the second quarter, and then the bench wasn't as effective, obviously, in the second half with Kuminga not quite at his best, and Moody just didn't make his shots, which is fine. You got to revert to them, regress to the mean at some point, right? Like he's been shooting 100% from deep, or basically might as well have been. Made another one fairly early on, but missed a few in the second half. He goes 1 for 6, 1 of 5 from 3-point range. It's fine. You're allowed to have a quiet one, especially like on the road. Young players are going to be up and down. Let's not. I think it's important here to just recall and remember that they're third-year players. They're still bench players at the end of the day. You're not going to get consistent production from them on a regular basis because their role isn't consistent. And therefore, I think it's a tough ask to think that, these 2 guys are just going to come out and have 10, 12 points on every single game, and Moody's going to shoot 50% from 3, and Kuminga's going to go 55% from the floor, and there's not going to be any turnovers, and there's not going to be any fouls. Like, it's just, that's such a, no one's expecting that, but I think it's important to remind ourselves that they are allowed quiet games. And then, as I spoke about earlier, like Gary Payton II, he was the best player on the floor for the Warriors across the 4 quarters in terms of just consistency. Right, like he had 12 points in the first half, nailed another triple in the second half, and that's going to be the key for him because he ends up playing just under 19 minutes, and if he's hitting his threes, 3 or 4 from deep, 6 of 8 from the field, if he's doing that, then I think that's really key to him playing 19, 20 minutes every game. If he's not doing that, then you might see him play 12, 13, 14 minutes every game. So, again, Jalen Green's a pretty dynamic offensive player. So this was a game where, GP2, and let's be honest, most teams have dynamic perimeter players. So GP2 is always going to be in the rotation some point or another. But it is interesting with Draymond coming back, obviously playing just under 21 minutes, the kind of minutes spread for the Warriors off the bench. Again, I think ideally going back to Saric and Kuminga, I think Saric would probably play 17, 18 minutes and Kuminga would play 22, 23. Ideally, I think you'd like to push Kuminga up closer to 25. But again, if he's going to make these kind of boneheaded plays, if he's going to have foul trouble, then what are you going to do? The plus minus was really somewhat even, apart from like CP3 was a plus 22. And again, it just goes down to the ball security, the lack of stress that we have as fans just watching him with the ball in his hands. And he's not shooting the ball well, as I said, but you get a guy out there who just knows what he's doing on every single play and just makes all the right reads. On both ends of the floor, I think defensively he's been okay. Like he's got his hands into a few for a couple of steals here and there. Like he's been solid. He's been a pretty good rebounder throughout his first 3 games. So he's going really well. And the plus minus here is, I think, a true indicator. Like often plus minus can be a bit of a lie, I suppose, but I think this has been a true indication of Chris Paul's impact on the Warriors over the first 3 games. And I think plus 22 is full credit to him for how he's been able to perform so far at the Warriors, how he's been able to fit into the team. Again, like we're going to get to a point here where Dre, logs his minutes up here to 30 minutes at some point. And we'll just have to wait and see how him and Chris are able to fit together. I do think there's an offensive skill set overlap, but ideally the Warriors will think that those 2 guys are smart enough, experienced enough to overcome any kind of physical issues, I suppose, with their skill set in terms of their playmaking and their lack of shooting and scoring. So we'll wait and see. I don't think like that closing lineup, Paul, Looney, and Draymond, I'm not sure that's going to be offensive minded enough to be too suitable come playoff time. But at the end of the day, I think that's the trust lineup, and the trust lineup should be utilized when you, like this game, lead by 7-8 points with 2 minutes left. Because the trust lineup for Steve is, we're not going to turn the ball over. We're not going to commit any silly fouls whatsoever. Let me just go to that and we'll close out this game. And that's what they did ultimately. So a good win, 11-point win in the end. Probably doesn't paint a picture of how close the game actually was. Like, as I said, the Rockets had their chances down the stretch. And fortunately, Steph just came to the rescue, as only Steph can at times. Just a shout out to Clay as well, who with his 5 threes, got into the top 10 on the all-time made 3-pointers list. So congratulations to him. If you haven't heard previously, like he's my favorite player of all time. So incredibly proud of what he's been able to do, and continue to be really happy and proud of what he's been able to do post injuries as well. I know a lot of us, including myself, have been critical of him over the preseason and his lack of form and his shooting throughout preseason and in the first game against the Suns. But like Friday against the Kings, I think this was a really efficient, solid game from Klay Thompson, full of good decision making, solid rebound. Like he has 4 rebounds, so I think he's made a bit of a move there to be a more constant presence on the glass. Not a huge rebounder by any means. He's not going to rack up double digits, but I do think that he has been really solid for the Warriors here. Other than that, I don't think I've got too much. Obviously, we've got the Pelicans tomorrow in New Orleans. That's going to be a tough one. The Pelicans have started the season reasonably well. They've got the best defensive rating in the league throughout the first 2 or 3 games. I'm not sure how much I want to buy into that. Offensively, there's a question mark as well with the Pelicans, because I don't like their spacing whatsoever. They're missing Trey Murphy the third at the moment, which is a huge loss for them. Their spacing, when you've got a non-shooter in Zion, a big man who likes to be in the paint in Jonas Valanciunas, a Brandon Ingram who is a steady 3-point shooter but certainly prefers to work in the mid-range, and when you got Herb Jones, who's a defensive-minded player whose 3-point shot is coming along, no doubt, but is ultimately not a strength of his game at this point. There are spacing issues with the Pelicans. I'm not sure they're actually a great matchup, though, for the Warriors, because the Pelicans will want to pound the ball inside, and the Warriors, obviously, I'm not sure if Draymond will play tomorrow on the second night of a back-to-back. I would doubt it, maybe, but we'll have to wait and see. Steve might have said something about that already. I'm not sure, haven't checked. But, Loon is, fantastic, but he's slightly undersized. And this is the kind of game where the Warriors' lack of size could really come to hurt them in terms of interior defense and rebounding, I think. So I would be concerned. I would be surprised if they won, if I'm being totally honest. Now, it sounds like, I'm not sure about Draymond because of his injury, obviously, but it sounds like all the Warriors' older core will play. Steph will play, Clay will play, Wiggs will play. Chris Paul will play, so they'll have a kind of full lineup to choose from. But I think it's still going to be a pretty tough battle against New Orleans, a team that could really, I think, exploit the lack of size and the defensive and rebounding issues that come along with that. Because to this point, we haven't necessarily seen it. We saw some obviously rebounding issues against the Suns in the season opener. But aside from that, like the Warriors have been one of the better defensive teams in the league here over the first 3 games. They kept the Rockets to, was it 37.8% shooting from the floor and 27.3% from deep. Again, the Rockets, I don't think, are a great offensive team by any means, but still a solid outing to keep them to less than 38% shooting from the floor and 95 points in total. That's what ultimately won the Warriors the game, because the Warriors themselves, 43.2% from the floor isn't fantastic, although they did shoot 40% from three. They shot 45 threes in this one. I do think, and I think it was mentioned on the broadcast, I do think that the Warriors could have tried to get inside a little bit more, because Şengün, that's the kind of major negative to his game, is his defense. And I think the Warriors probably settled a little bit too much on threes, but again, they made 18 of them at 40%, so you probably can't complain too much. Other than that, guys, I don't think I will have a post-game live tomorrow after the Pelicans game. If you weren't listening to my last episode, I said it was my mum's birthday tomorrow, so I'll be probably celebrating that a little bit. But I'll certainly have a game recap on bluemanhoop.com straight afterwards, so go check that out. Other than that, we've got the Kings again on Wednesday, I think, at Chase Center. I believe it is Thursday for me, Australian time. So looking forward to that one. We'll do a post-game live there. Other than that, enjoy the rest of your day. I know for you guys in America, it's closing on 8 p.m. Maybe sit down and watch the replay of the Warriors getting a 106-95 win over the Rockets to go 2-1 on the season ahead of the matchup with the Pelicans tomorrow. Until next time, thank you.